Hey guys, welcome back. So, as always, just a huge thank you to you all for viewing, liking, sharing. Please carry on. I really appreciate all the support that you guys have given me over the past few months. Still can't believe it's been 6 months since I started this. I've really enjoyed watching this channel grow. I'm hoping to see it grow further. So, as always, like, your support really means the world to me. I'm hoping today's case is one that you're not too familiar with, or you may be familiar, you maybe heard it at the time, but you don't really know the full story behind it. And that's what I'm trying to aim to do with this channel. I don't want to go for the really well-known cases unless it's something that you guys want me to talk about. I appreciate any sort of suggestions that you guys want to give. So please, like I said, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment down below. If you want me to talk about any cases, then I will definitely 100% talk about a case. So today we are going to be looking at the story of Stefano Brizzi. So Stefano, he was born on the 26th of June 1966, and he was the youngest of 3 children, and the parents brought up their 3 children in Tuscany in Italy. So Stefano's parents brought the children up in a really strict religious Catholic household. Stefano said that he soon realised when he was about 15 that he was actually gay. And despite obviously legislation making gay relationships legal in Tuscany since 1853, so, almost 100 years before the UK or anywhere else in the world, and obviously some countries in the world still have it as law that it's actually illegal to be gay, sorry. You just have to look at what's going on in Ghana at the moment, where they're making it a prison sentence just for being open and being yourself. It's some places of the world still not accepted. But he struggled still being accepted, and mainly that's because of his parents' religious beliefs. He described himself as being really haunted by his sexuality. So as a teen and a young adult, Stefano was a student at the University of Florence, where he actually ended up graduating with 2 degrees. These were in philosophy and in language. And he started his working life as a social worker, and then he completely changed fields and began working as a computer programmer. Now, with his fear of being accepted, Stefano hid his sexuality pretty well from his family, but he actually became a part of Tuscany's burgeoning gay scene. So obviously, bearing in mind this, talking about growing up in the 1980s, we all know what it was like in the 1980s for young gay men and women. So obviously that couldn't have been too easy, but gay-friendly places and gay bars and whatever, they've been a part of many cultures since the 1960s. So around the time, especially in London, around the time that obviously this whole being gay was illegal. So while he was going to these places, he was introduced to BDSM and sadism, and this was something that he adopted into his sex life throughout his adult life. In 2012, at the age of 42, Stefano was diagnosed with HIV and hepatitis C, and he was really embarrassed by this. He really ashamed, and he decided for a fresh start in London. So at the age of 42, he just ups and leaves and comes to the UK for a fresh start in life. With obviously his feelings around HIV, it's kind of understandable, even though it's, we always hear that it's not the death sentence that it used to be, and it really isn't. I spoke about my personal dealings with that during my Darryl Rowe video, which is actually my most popular video on here at the moment. I spoke briefly about my personal attachment to that cause and to that virus, even though I'm negative at the particular time. I felt the exact same as Stefano felt when there was a possibility that I could have had it, and it is literally just down to the stigma that the virus still holds to this day, even though there is so much more knowledge, so much more understanding, and obviously various drugs and treatments that you can take. The stigma is always there and always present. But I digress. Carry on with the story. So, in London, Stefano felt that he could finally be himself, and he was able to live and work fully without the judgment of his family. And he began working for Morgan Stanley. This is quite a big, well-known banking place in London, and he was actually their lead IT consultant. He also worked as their web developer, and he began earning a salary of £70,000 a year. Now, in his personal life, Stefano had begun experimenting with various drugs like GHB, poppers. He began abusing alcohol, and he then soon developed a real crippling addiction to crystal meth. He quickly realised he did have a problem and began seeking help within support groups, and he initially began making really, really good progress with this. And during one of these meetings, Stefano held a symbolic funeral for his addiction. He handcrafted a little mini coffin and held a symbolic funeral. But he was never able to actually fully beat his addictions. Like, his ugly head just kept rising up and rising up. And that's quite a common thing with people with addictions. You see it all the time, especially if it's a well-documented case of addiction. It's always going to pop up with various stressors in that person's life. So, during this time, Stefano became a huge fan of the series Breaking Bad, and eventually some members of the support group said that when he would make the visits, Stefano would always be wearing the show's merchandise, so like various t-shirts, bearing the logo hats, so on. In 2015, Stefano reached rock bottom, and he lost his job with Morgan Stanley, and he became really, really reclusive. He barely left his flat, and when he did, it was only at night time. He would spend his days with the curtains closed, continuously taking crystal meth, and just basically binge watching Breaking Bad. And his only social interactions at this point was by Grindr, where he would invite people over for chemsex parties. If you're not familiar with what a chemsex party is, it's literally what it says in the tin. So, and it's not just within gay culture, it's within any sort of relationship that these things can happen. So whereas obviously two women, man and woman, man and man, anyone can have a chemsex party, and it is literally just inviting people over. You take a whole host of drugs that heighten the senses, so like poppers, GHB, which obviously is a muscle relaxer, if taken in small quantities, is a muscle relaxer. poppers, obviously, they also a muscle relaxer, but also things like crystal meth, cocaine can be introduced in those things, and these parties can last from anywhere between a few hours to a few days. So they are widely popular with people who do indulge in that kind of thing. I've never been to one myself personally because I don't have any interest in drug culture, but they are quite popular, and still today they are very, very popular. On a side note, I spoke quite openly about my personal issues with Grindr, but when I was on there, I would get numerous messages inviting me to various chemsex parties, and it was just not really my thing. But again, I digress. So, on the 1st of April 2016, Stefano was actually on Grindr when he made contact with Gordon Semple, who is sadly the unfortunate victim in this story. So, before we carry on, I'm just going to take a moment to talk about Gordon and who he was as a person. So, Gordon was born in 1957, and he had a brother, Ronald. They grew up in Inverness in Scotland, and he was described as a real popular family man and friend. He was said to have been someone who would always help other people. He always wanted to give back, so he would do things for charity, hold like little organisations, go on marathons. He would fundraise for cancer research, and Gordon held a degree in accountancy, and he said to use this to move to London, and he began working for the Metropolitan Police, and he worked in their fraud unit, and he served over 30 years in the Metropolitan Police. So that's the only information I can really find about Gordon, unfortunately. I would like to have spoke a bit more about him, but as always, there's a certain information that I can gather, certain websites that I can access. So, April 2016, Gordon was now 59, and he was actually at work when he made contact with Stefano via Grindr. And Gordon's message wrote, "Free now for a hot, dirty, sleazy session." Now, you're probably thinking, why would you open a message like that to someone you don't know? But it is really, really common on Grindr because it is a sex app. A lot of the times you don't get, people asking about you. They literally come out with something like that in their opening message. So, reading that, I wasn't really surprised, but it may surprise some of you who don't use the app or who are not gay, so obviously you'd have no reason to use the app. So the CCTV tracked Gordon's journey from Stefano's. It showed him stepping off the train at Blackfriars Station, and this was around 3 p.m. and he starts to make the 15-minute walk to Stefano's flat. And Stefano said that even though he initially agreed, he really wasn't in the mood to host anything. He was sleep deprived, and he had recently been stood up by another man from Grindr, which again is a really common thing. So when Gordon arrives, Stefano said he was disappointed as he felt that Gordon was just really unattractive, labelling him as really ugly and fat. And it's really unclear as to what did happen during this night for Gordon to lose his life. As Stefano just repeatedly changed his story as time went on. But it is believed that strangulation was the cause of his death, or it could have been because obviously with Stefano's lifestyle, it could have been that drugs were involved. But like I said, his story changed like the weather at any given moment. So it's believed that the two of them spent quite a few hours together talking. They begin having sex, they start taking drugs, and they begin to try and engage other men into joining them. And after a few hours, they get lucky. An unnamed man, he was seen arriving at the flat around 7 or 8 p.m. and he buzzes up to Stefano's flat. But Stefano seemed to have had a change of mind at this point, and he told the man to go away and said that they were having a situation. One of us has fallen ill, but we're taking care of it. Our party is cancelled. So, at this point, we can only assume that Gordon was already dead. Now, back at his house in Dartford, in Kent, was his partner in 25 years, Gary Meeks. And throughout this whole thing, obviously, Gary had no idea that Gordon was using Grindr to meet other men behind his back. As far as they were in a long-term committed relationship. So Gary was getting worried as him and Gordon had actually planned to have a night out in the pub. And it was unusual for Gordon to not show up on time. They planned their night even down to what they were going to have for dinner, and what they were going to watch on TV after they'd been to the pub. And the next morning, Gary reports Gordon missing, and this is when the Metropolitan Police, they launch a big investigation, because obviously it's one of their own that's gone missing. So, on the 4th of April 2016, the caretaker of Stefano's block, his name was Steve Harris, he noticed a really strong odour emanating from Stefano's flat. So he knocks, but he doesn't get any answer. And he then goes outside to have a cigarette break. Now, as he was smoking, he noticed a light come on in Stefano's flat. And he said that when the central heating was turned on in this block, you would be able to see the smoke coming out of the little turrets or the outside flute. So Steve, he ends up going back and he peers through Stefano's letterbox, and he sees Stefano walking by, and obviously Stefano notices him looking through, so he opens the door, and Steve tells Stefano about the complaints that's been received about the smell, and Stefano then said that the smell was actually coming from his cooking, as he was expecting some people over that evening. So, knowing that he's about to be caught out, Stefano, he really begins panicking. And on the 5th of April, he is seen entering a hardware shop and purchases a metal sheet. He purchases a saw, pincers, a putty knife, bleach, carpet cleaner, rubber gloves, and some really large industrial buckets. And at one point, Stefano is seen on the CCTV trying to gauge how big and deep these buckets are. So he's placing it over his head and seeing if the bucket will go past his shoulders. So Stefano makes his purchase and he rushes home and he begins the process of dismembering Gordon's body. He said that while using the saw, he was able to decapitate Gordon and then removed his limbs one by one. He then takes inspiration from an episode of his favourite programme, Breaking Bad. So reportedly in the 2nd episode of the 1st series, there's a quite infamous scene where the lead character tries to dissolve someone's body in a bath of acid. And this is what he does. He fills up his bath with acid. I believe it was hydrochloric acid or something like that. Whatever one's the weaker one, I think sulfuric acid is a stronger one. Because it was the weaker of the two, it wasn't strong enough to break down the body parts effectively. But he begins his process. He fills up his bathtub and he submerges Gordon's arms, legs in the bathtub in the hopes that the acid will burn away any sort of vital evidence. So on the 7th of April, Steve Harris returns with his brother Martin to confront Stefano, as the smell is still really present, still really pungent. And Stefano gives the same cooking excuse that he gave a few days before. But Steve really doesn't believe him and ends up calling the emergency services. And an ambulance ends up arriving at the block, and paramedics immediately, they recognise the smell as rotting flesh. So they end up contacting the police. Two officers, PC Savage and PC Edwards, they arrive at the scene. So Stefano opens the door wearing just a pair of pink Speedos and a pair of sunglasses. The officers, they can clearly see that he's under the influence of something. Obviously, we know that he's probably taken crystal meth again. They don't know this at this point, but they can clearly see that he's highly intoxicated. They notice the overpowering smell of the rotting flesh mixed with cleaning chemicals. So before they say anything, Stefano, he just basically blurts out everything. He tells them that he's killed someone. He says he's killed a police officer and that Satan had told him to do it. He says then that he told Satan that he would do it at the first opportunity. So the officers aren't sure whether to believe him due to his intoxicated state. But Stefano carries on and says, I've cut him up. And he says that he believed the man was called Lee and they had met on Grindr. But it wasn't until after the murder that he found the police badge with the name Gordon Temple. So the officers then enter the flat and they begin investigating. PC Savage, she enters the bathroom and she finds the bathtub filled with acid with various body parts floating. Now obviously she believes that this is just water, so she puts her hand in into the tub to investigate a little bit further. And she ended up, obviously, as we know, with acid, she ended up having to require extensive surgery and treatment on the burns that she had received. Now, in the bathroom, they also found a black bin liner, and when looking into this, Savage, she ended up turning to PC Edwards, and she said, there's a carcass. So in this bag was even more parts of Gordon's body. So they arrest Stefano on suspicion of murder and he's taken to Lewisham Police Station, and further investigations of the flat was described as surreal, with mounds of flesh, fat and bones. They were found all around the flat. In containers and buckets they found a pelvis, part of Gordon's head, one hand and part of Gordon's spine. A part of Gordon's rib was then found in the bin and they could clearly see bite marks in the rib, and so this indicated cannibalism. And this was actually later clarified when looking at the oven, and on the stove was a cooking pot, and this had congealed oil and fat all within the cooking pot, and a tray in the oven contained the same thing. DNA samples taken from this matched the DNA they were able to retrieve from the body parts, and obviously matched to Gordon. So one of Gordon's legs was then also found with extensive heat damage to it. This was later clarified that Stefano had attempted to roast it. Smaller body parts were later found in the drains, as Stefano had attempted to flush them down the toilet, so very reminiscent of Dennis Nilsson. Post-it notes found in the flat showed Stefano had been writing about the devil, and some of these notes were actually written directly to the devil. And he stated, "Satan, I have called you forth," and other various lines of address. A copy of the Satanic Bible was then later found downloaded onto Stefano's computer. So police then began looking at the communal bins at the flats, with even more small body parts found thrown into the rubbish, and one of Gordon's feet was actually later found on the south side of the River Thames by a member of the public. So during his initial police interview, so the police held him for quite some time to try and sober up from whatever he was intoxicated on, and eventually they're able to interview him. Stefano just basically lays everything out. The sergeant told him that obviously he had the right to remain silent and he could wait for a lawyer, but Stefano waved away this right, and he was told that although he wasn't suicidal, he often prayed that he would overdose, and that on the day of the murder he took the most amount of drugs that he had ever taken. He told investigators, "On crystal meth, the voice was consistent. It was a very clear voice, 'You must kill,' and he repeats this line quite numerous times, 'You must kill, you must kill.'" He adds that he was always against murder, he was just out of his mind, and he goes on to say, "I'm saying this because the murder was dictated to me while I was high on drugs." So when asked about the last time he had taken crystal meth, he replied that, "I took crystal meth yesterday when I was thinking I should get rid of the corpse. 4 days had passed and nobody had suspected, so I thought I was getting away with it. I was nearly finished and I took a shot. I was going to finish the job today." He tells the police that he disposed of Gordon's possessions by throwing him into a sewer, along with a dog lead and collar, and this dog lead and collar was actually quite believed to be one of the instruments that resulted in Gordon's death. So he then asks if he could have his phone back, as he was expecting actual guests to come around that night for another party, and that he needed to cancel. And he then requests a shower, as his bath had been unusable for quite some days. So the trial begins on the 16th of October 2016, during which Stefano begins retracting his confessions. He says that he tells the jury that Gordon arrived using the name of Lee for sex, and that Gordon actually wanted to record the whole entire scenario, which Stefano said he was really uncomfortable with. Stefano says that he felt that Gordon was setting him up for what? I don't know. He adds that Gordon had an interest in BDSM, and that he wore the lead and collar throughout the night. He says that Gordon requested for the collar to be pulled tighter, and that somehow the collar slipped, and that's how Gordon ended up dead. We all know that obviously that is impossible. If you strangle someone, obviously you need to use a lot of force, B, it takes around 4 to 5 minutes for someone to die when you are strangling them. So that wouldn't really be possible if you just slipped. Yeah, you're going to get a little shock or whatever, you're going to choke a little bit, but it's not going to be enough to actually kill someone. So, due to the state of Gordon's body, pathologists, they were actually really unable to ascertain what the cause of death was. Strangulation, they said, was possible, but they couldn't clarify it. They were able to see that Gordon had received a substantial wound to his face prior to his death. And during the course of the trial, Stefano was shown to be really highly emotional. He was in hysterics and he had to be removed numerous times throughout the trial to gain composure and come back in. Stefano's defence, they focused on Stefano not being in the right state of mind, but psychiatric reports showed that he had absolutely no issues with anything that would diminish his responsibility to murder. The CCTV of Stefano collecting the items in the hardware shop backed all this up. So obviously, like I said earlier, you see him in the CCTV placing the bucket over his head, measuring it, and he's meticulously thought out of what items that he would require. So it took the jury over 30 hours deliberation before coming back with a 10-2 guilty verdict. And Stefano was then sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 24 years before he could be eligible for parole, plus another 7 years for obstructing a coroner. Obviously, I believe that's to do with Stefano dismembering the corpse, and obviously the heat damage when you try to cook the leg, the acid damage to the other body parts. I think that's obviously what it is to do with obstructing the coroner. So these were said to have been served concurrently, so the 24 years, so in total he was to serve 31 years imprisonment. And he was then sent to Belmarsh prison to begin his sentence. Judge Nicholas Hilliard, QC, closed his statement with, "Regret you express now for Mr. Semple's death has to be seen against what you did for a number of days to his body." That's the only part of the judge's statement that I could find, because you guys know me, I like to go in deep with the judge's statements. I like to know, but I literally couldn't find anything, if I'm honest. Obviously, most of what I've got is from articles from around that time, but there's only so much information you can get off those articles. But we'll carry on. In Impact statement, Gordon's brother Ronald said that Gordon was a loyal and much-loved long-term partner, brother, brother-in-law, uncle, cousin and friend to all. We were devastated when the news broke of Gordon's death and the circumstances. It's all incredibly hard to deal with. It is still insurmountably upsetting. Gordon was a Dixon of Doc Green character. I wasn't really sure what he meant by that, so obviously I had to look that up, and he just basically referring to a program that ran from 1955 to 1976 on the BBC, and it was called Dixon of Doc Green. It revolved around a police officer called George Dixon, who was said to be like a really upstanding, caring member of his community, member of the force, really popular, and it was a really popular show that ran for 21 years. So he just basically saying that it was, the two shared a lot of characteristics, one being fictional, one being non-fiction. Now, fortunately, Stefano didn't end up atoning for his crime. He only ended up serving 8 weeks of his prison sentence. On the 5th of February 2017, Stefano was found unresponsive in his cell. He's later on declared dead, or they now call it life extinct. He was believed to have died as suicide by hanging. Now, Stefano had actually been placed on suicide watch back in December 2016 when he was actually found in possession of a noose. But he was taken off the suicide watch by January the 4th, 2017. An inquest was actually launched as to why this had actually happened, which is always really, really common when you have a death in custody during when a prisoner is found to have died by suicide. In the inquest, obviously, they asked the questions as to why he was taken off suicide watch. He was found physically with the thing that took his life. They try to argue that they felt that he wasn't a risk anymore. Personally, I believe it's literally just down to the prison service is so criminally understaffed, and staff they do have are overworked. So many prisoners are in such an enclosed area. It's really difficult for example, if you got, 200 prisoners on a wing, you've then only got 10 members of staff on that wing, and you've got to divide that up with caring for that many prisoners. Obviously, there's certain prisoners that are doing life that you're responsible for. You're their personal officer. I don't know if that's still a thing anymore. Anyone who works in the prison service, you can correct me down below if the personal officer thing is still a thing. But the prison service as a whole is incredibly understaffed, undervalued, underpaid, and it's really difficult for them, sadly, to be able to do their job effectively. They really do need any help and financial backing that we can afford, or the government can afford. The government really needs to pull their socks up and support anyone who is in the prison service, because if there were more staff, there probably would be less suicides. I'm not saying that the suicides will completely stop, because they won't, because unfortunately mental health is another thing that's really rife in prison service. But again, I digress. So Ronald, Golden's brother, he gave an interview after the news of Stefano's death broke. He said that the police did call them on the Sunday to let us know what happened after speaking to Gary. They told us that he had hung himself and he had been found Sunday morning. And it was always in the back of my mind that something like this would happen. But when it came out of the blue, it was still... when the call came, it was completely out of the blue. He is dead, and I'm happy at that, but part of me would like to have seen him locked up for the whole 24 years. The whole family has just been trying to move on since Christmas, though it has been really difficult, and we still have the April 1st date of Golden's death coming up. We still don't believe it has happened, to be honest, but the police have been really fantastic. They've called us up every so often to see how we are, and they let us know what's happening. We are still completely satisfied with the trial and the overall result. So it kind of reflected an earlier interview that Ronald had given, where he basically spoke out and wanted to see Stefano die, but he then later came back and saying that he was 50-50 about the whole thing, about Stefano's death. That's kind of where the story ends. I couldn't find any updates about about Gordon's family. Couldn't find any updates about Gary, and I do hope that if the family have happened to come across this video, I really hope that I've done it justice. I didn't want to go in judge Golden too harsh for his actions on that night. I just wanted to pay more attention to the information I could find and give Gordon a voice. But I really do hope that his family are doing well. I hope Gary's doing well and managed to find a way to live his life in the knowledge of what happened to his long-term partner. Because I don't want to say obviously get over it, because how can you get over something like that? So again, as always, just a huge thank you to you all for being here. Thank you for listening. Your time, your patience and everything is always really important to me. I really appreciate every single one of you who come back on a weekly basis and do watch. Please like, share and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. I do read the comments, as you guys are aware. And I will see you guys next week for the next true crime story with Silhouette. Until then, stay safe and I will see you soon.